All right, good evening. Today we're learning Maseches Bava Daf Nun Gimel, and we're starting what? No. And I'm on the very bottom line of Nun Beis and Beis. We had discussed a scenario in our previous Mishnah. The previous Mishnah that we had learned is in the middle of Nun Beis and Aleph, and we discussed a din that if an animal heard the sound of the shovel digging and then it fell into a hole, so if the animal fell forward, so then potentially the Mishnah says you'd be chayiv. If the animal fell backwards, so then you'd be pater. That's what the Mishnah said. Let's analyze. Amar Rav lefanav mamish. It means literally falling forward. And the achrav mamish means you're literally falling backwards. That if you fall forwards, you're going to be chayiv. We'll soon see that this is how Rav explains things, because that then leads to the hevel issue, where you're kind of nose diving into the hevel, and that's going to lead to death. And la'achorav means you're dying not because of the hevel, because you went backwards, and therefore you die because of chavata. You die because the animal hits its body on the ground, and therefore Rav would say you're pater, because Rav holds that the chavata is the karka that doesn't belong to you. What belongs to you is what you cut out. You carved out that there should be the hevel, so therefore you're going to be pater when you die, when the animal dies by chavata. And Rav l'taime, this is exactly like we saw earlier, just a few blot ago on Shabbos. Rav l'taime de Amar Rav, top of Nun Gimel Amar Aleph, top line, bor shechayev Torah alav lehevlo v'lo lechavato. That's why falling forward you'll be chayev, and if the animal falls in backwards, it will not be chayev, because the chavata is not what the Torah was mechayev. Interesting. Well, the Shmuel says the Gemara, Shmuel Amar Bebor, Bein Milefana, Bein Milacharav. It doesn't matter what way the animal falls in. And Shmuel L'taimei de Amar Lehevlo V'Kol Sheken L'Chavato. He says that yes, it's true, an animal can die because of hevel, but an animal can also die because of chavata. He doesn't say that the chibut of the animal doesn't count, and therefore, according to Shmuel's going to have a problem with our Mishnah. But Shmuel now said, oh, you're going to be chayiv no matter what, even if you fall in backwards. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. Elahechi dami, then, according to Shmuel, la'acharav mikol kriya de pater. That was a line in the Mishnah. Shmuel can't argue with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, Nun Beis Mid Aleph, said, black on white, I'm reading right now from our Mishnah in the middle of Nun Beis Mid Aleph, that nafal lefanav mikol kriya chayiv, and la'acharav mikol kriya pater. So if the Mishnah says that nafal mikol kriya backwards, that the animal is going to be pater, how can Shmuel say over here on the top of Nun Gimel Amud Aleph that you're chayiv no matter what? So it says the Gemara, when do we say you're pater? That's not when you fall in the bore. That's when you trip over the lip of the bore, the short trips, but doesn't fall into the bore. It trips, falls over the hole, and dies from whatever injury that it has. There you're going to be pater. But to fall in, says Shmuel, you're going to be chayiv no matter what, whether or not it was hevel or chavata. Says the Gemara Esvei, we have a brisa, it might be that according to some girsos, it's meisvei. And the Gemara says we have a problem with the sheet of Rav, because we have a brisa right here on Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, 8 lines down, that says Bebor bein lefanav bein la'acharav. Rav was of the opinion that if it's lefanav, you're going to be chayiv, and if it's la'acharav, you're going to be pater. This brisa seems to say you're chayiv no matter what, and the Gemara in this brisa concludes to Yuvta de Rav. This shows a big problem for the sheet of Rav, because Rav says that you're pater if you fall in la'achorav. The Gemara provides 3 responses. Amar Rav Chizda Mo de Rav bebor birshusa dechayev mishum de Amar le, and I'll tell you what the claim is in the moment. But Rav says that if a property is owned by someone, then Rav does not make the distinction of hevel and chavata. When did Rav say that hevel kills and chibut doesn't kill? That's in Rishus Harabim, where the karka itself doesn't belong to you. You carved out the open space. The hevel's there, you're chayiv if the animal goes face first. But if the animal goes backwards and you're in Rishus Harabim, so then you're going to be pater because you don't own the ground. But here, answer number 1 as to how this brisa of Bebor, bein lefana, bein la'acharav chayiv can work according to Rav is if it's birshuso de chayiv. Why? Mishum de amar le mimanashach, one way or the other. Ibehevla mis, if in your own property, Mr. Mazik, if in your own property the animal died because of the hevel, hevla didachu. And ibechavata mis, if the animal died by hitting its body on the ground, then chavata didachu, because it's private property. And that's all answer number 1. And here's answer number 2. Rava Amar hacha b'mayaskinan b'mishapech, where the animal flips as it's falling down in the air. It starts out the nafala ape, First, it starts going down face first, and it's breathing in the air, which is one form of death. And then it spins while it's falling and lands on its back. And there was some assistance from the Hevel. And in that case, Rabbah says that even Rav would agree that you're going to be chayiv in such a case, which is an interesting ukimta, where the animal rotates when it falls. You know, cats can do that in their, they have the capacity to land on their feet. This cow's 1,000 pounds. And remember, as we discussed yesterday, that under the most minimal of circumstances, the hole's only 10 tfachim tall, which is, you don't have time to rotate. But Lamaisa, if an animal were to have rotated, it started out going face first.
Like he's saying it, we cast out, for lack of a
Right. Meaning, in halachic terms, we'd have to say that the Hevel donated to the death. We'd have to say something like that. Whatever the Metziah says, I don't know. You need Rishonim.
Don't know what the Hevel is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it donated to the cause. It attributed. That's the right word. Correct. So that's answer number 2, that the way Rav can be understood in this brisa, which says Babor bein lefana bein la'achrav chayev, the way that we can have it that he would be, that Rav would still make sense, is if ahani bay, as if the animal flips around. And answer number 3, and we're a quarter of the way down, Rav Yosef Amar, hacha benizke bor bishor askinan. We're not even talking about the shore. We're talking about damage that's done to the pit. We weren't even talking about the other case scenario. My nihu, how did he ruin the pit? Shehivishes meimav, that when the animal fell, it ruined whatever water was in there. In such a case, when the damage of the shore falling in was such a damage that it ruined the contents of the bore, the water that was there, we don't care if it's la'achorav, and we don't care if it's lefanav. It doesn't matter, because it isn't about the shore dying. It's about the shore causing damage to the water that's there. So 3 different answers. The first 2 answers are on the reservation, and this answer completely changes things and says we're b'chlal not even talking about damages to the shore. We're only talking about damages to the bore. Huge chiddush. The Gemara then says, Tani Reb Chananya l'siyua l'Rab. There's a brisa bought by Reb Chananya as an assistance to the shita of Rab, and we're a third of the way down on Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. V'nafal. The pasuk says v'nafal ad she'yipol derech nefila, that only if an animal falls in a regular way. Mikan amru. This is where our Mishnah got its language from. That nafal lefana mikol hakriya chayev. That if an animal falls forward because of the sounds of the shovel in the pit, and then it breathes in the hevel, you're chayev. But la'achor, if an animal falls in backwards, mikol hakriya pater. V'zev v'zev bor, and both of them are inside of a pit. That is a perfect siyua for the shita of Rav. Very well done by Rav Chananya. Perfect. The Gemara then analyzes this brisa. Omar Mar nafal lefana mikol hakriya chayev. Says the Gemara that if an animal falls face first into a pit after hearing the sounds of shoveling by the worker, the halacha is that the Baal Habor is chayev ve'amai. But why should there be any chiyuv? Nema kura garamla. It should be considered like a gram, like a grama. Why? Because the animal only was appealed to the bore because it heard some sounds. So it should be that the man who did the digging would be chayev at most. But even that would be a grama ben nizikin. So why isn't all of this grama ben nizakin and therefore pater? So Amar of Simi Barashi Hamani, who is it that we're talking about? And now we're going to be jumping into a broader sugya that we've touched upon prior, which is Rabbi Nasan. Rabbi Nasan had a unique shita. De Amar Bal Habor Hezeka Ka'avid. The owner of the bore caused the damage, even though the man who was digging at the bottom created the sound that drew the animal in. And halfway down, Reb Nasan had a unique shita, and we're going to totally unpack his shita now. But the Gemara says that when there's a scenario where there's multiple players involved, for example, in our case, let's say I'm the owner of the pit, but I have a worker who's doing the digging at the bottom of the pit. We both played a role in the death of your animal. So says the Gemara, because you're not able to collect from my worker at the bottom of the pit because Grama bin Izakin is pater, but mishtale mehai, you can still collect from the Baal Habor, which is me. I own the bore. Your shore fell in because of the digging. So says the Gemara, perhaps the reason why in our Mishnah on Days of Aleph, the reason why we would say that there's any chiyuv at all, if an animal falls into a pit when a worker is working and digging at the bottom and then the animal falls in, why would we say you're chayiv? It's grama ben nizak and pater. Says the Gemara, perhaps we hold like Reb Nasan, who holds that you're allowed to collect from any of the players involved, anyone who has cash left. You got one guy who says bankruptcy, good, go to the next person in line. Ledugma, we just had what's his face, just got a massive $148 million lawsuit. He filed bankruptcy the next day. So the plaintiffs could then go to the next person who was involved in the lawsuit. You just keep going down the line so you can collect all of your monies. That's the Shita of Reb Nosson, Titania. Let's now learn the appropriate Marimakom. We learned about Reb Nosson out of context. This is really the right place to learn about Shitas Reb Nosson. And here is the right way to understand him. Titania. Shor Shadochaf es Chaver Labor. So we have Ruvain's cow and Shimon's cow and Levi's pit. So Ruvain's cow pushes Levi's cow, pushes Shimon's cow into Levi's pit. Bal Hashor Chayev Balabor Pater. So I, who own Ruvain pushed Shimon's cow. I should say, I'm Ruvain, I own my cow. And my cow pushed your cow into another person's pit. So the din is, according to the Tanakama, that the Bal Hashor is Chayev, the Balabor is Pater. The Tanakama has clean lines of Chiyuv. The Bal Hashor is the Chayev, and the Balabor is the Pater. Reb Nosson Amar, no. Bal Hashor Meshalem Mechza, uBal Habor Meshalem Mechza. No, you're allowed to collect from either person, says Reb Nosson. There isn't this limited scope of places to collect money from. Anyone who's involved is considered a guilty party. And if you can't collect from person number one, go collect from person number two. So let's just articulate our case more clearly. So my cow pushes your cow into Levi's pit. So the Tanakama holds that I'm accountable and the owner of the pit is not accountable. Period. Phil, files for bankruptcy. Okay, then the Nizaki were damaged. You're out. Just your loss. Bankruptcy is an unfair reality to the people who are owed the money. Understood.
Is it in halacha bankruptcy?
It's just that if you have no money, you have no way to pay. It's not.
I understand, but I'm saying
yeah.
like a little.
You cannot discharge your debts.
Yeah, I've never heard of such a thing.
That's the idea of inevitability.
Also, right? I can't imagine that you'd have, just because of your financial situation, that you'd be allowed to. Yeah, in America, it comes with like a heavy. There's like another shoe to drop when you file bankruptcy. It impacts everything in your credit life. I mean, it's a nightmare, I'm sure. But I've never tried, though. Sometimes I'm tempted. The whole bankruptcy thing. My tuition was $127,000 this year, post-tax dollars. 127. You have to make 170 to pay the 127. But the schools are great about it. Anyways, I'm just joking, of course. But
yeah, it sits on you for like 10 years. Something like that. 7 years, 10 years.
Oh, I don't even know. Yeah, but like David said, there's no construct like that in halacha to just totally dissolve all of your responsibilities.
So then in that case, if a person.
So you die, your Yorshim take over. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so in this case, the Tanakama was of the opinion that only one person is held accountable. It's whoever was the most liable. The way that the Tanakama felt that this was true, the Tanakama was of the opinion that the Baal Hashor, when my cow pushed your cow, he said Phil's cow is the jerk cow, and Phil is on the hook. I, the Baal Habor. So the Gemara says that according to the Tanakama, the Baal Habor is completely patur. Reb Nosson is saying, no way, that's not correct. Reb Nosson says that they split. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second, a little bit of a complicating factor that leads us to a very complex. It's not complex to read the words of the Gemara, but it's the math is a little difficult. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second, V'atanya, we have a brisa. Yes, we agree that Reb Nosson holds of all plaintiffs involved as liable parties. However, V'atanya, Reb Nosson Omer, Baal Habor Mishalim Gimel Chalakim, Ubal Ashor Revia. So he says there's more responsibility for the Baal HaBor, where the Baal HaBor will be Meshalem Gimel Chalakim, who Baal HaShor will be Meshalem Revia. So remember, I pushed your cow in and your cow died. So says the Gemara, the Baal HaBor has to pay 3/4, and the Baal HaShor have to pay 1/4. So this is a stira, because a line ago we said it was 50-50. And by the way, fascinatingly, in this brisa, it's the polar opposite of the initial Tanakama. Remember, the Tanakama said the Baal HaBor is patur entirely, and the Baal HaShor was on the hook. Here, this version of Reb Nosson is the other way, where not only is the Baal HaBor part of the mix, but he's the primary payer. That's very different. These are very, pretty drastic payment differences between the Tanakama and Reb Nosson number 2. So it says the Gemara, lo kashya, ha bitam, ha bimuad. When we're dealing with a tam, the math works out in one way. And habemuad, when we're dealing with a muad, the math works out in another way. Take a look at Rashi to help guide us. Rashi says a little bit more than halfway down, habetam, in regards to a tam, Bal Hashor Mishalem Rivia, the time of Mefarish Lekame, the Bal Hashor will pay just 1/4. And therefore, habemuad, the mechayev nezik shalem, kol chad mishalem mechza. Everybody pays half. So again, we don't have the svaras yet, but we have the information that in the case of tam, the Bal Hashor will pay 1/4, and the Bala Bor will pay 3/4. But in regards to a case of muad, the two plaintiffs involved, the Bala Shor and the Bala Bor, each of them will pay half in a case of muad. Says the Gemara, uvetam maiko savar. What's going on with this tam that he's only paying a revia? How did that work out? So says the Gemara, because remember, it's my animal is a tam. So if my animal is a tam, I only pay a revia. Says the Gemara, Ika savar, what's the svar? Ika savar, hi kule hazeka avad, v'hai kule hazeka avad. Really, I am 100% responsible as a balashor, and you're 100% responsible as a balabor. Then hai mishum palga, v'hai mishum palga, or each of them is responsible for 50%. Because of our hai palga zekavad, hai palga zekavad, balabor mishalim palga balashor revia, v'idach riva mafsid. If you want to say that we're talking about where each person is required to pay 50% of whatever their obligations are, so then if the balabor is really supposed to pay full damages, he ends up paying 50%. The balashor, if the animal's a tam, what's half of the tam payment? Because he's only paying a palga. So then the Gemara says palga of chatzi nezek is revia. And v'idach, and the last quarter, v'idach riva mafsid, the nizak loses out that money. So this answer doesn't seem to work out very well, because then we end up with 1/4 never being paid. According to that second brisa of Reb Nassan, it seemed that 3/4 were being paid by the balabor, and 1/4 was being paid by the balashor. But the way the Gemara wanted to explain the two Reb Nassans by saying that one was betam and one was bemuad, is that if you say that really it's talking about a case of tam, and really be'etzim, each person has to pay chatzi what they're obligated. So then it turns out that the balabor is only paying half, and the balashor is only paying 1/4, and 1/4 is lost in the transaction where the nizak never collects it. So how then do we understand this case? So the Gemara says on the second of the wide lines, Amar Rava, Reb Nassan dainahu. Reb Nassan was a big dayan, v'nachis le'umka dedina, and he was the type of dayan who would go all the way down. He had everything crystal clear, like we're impressed with our dayanim, and they're very impressive. But when you hear a compliment like this about a tana, it's a compliment of a compliment of a compliment. Again, we're not used to this, and a lot of this is just an emotional capacity of focusing on learning. One of the reasons why we don't remember a lot of what we learn is because we're not really focused. But where there were no cell phones, people had even better focus, and where they're back in the day when people were really must meet, and they just remembered a lot more. Some of it was pikchus, they were very bright, I'm sure. Some of it is photographic memories. But most of our greats really worked very hard. They were spending a lot of time in the base medrash, pounding the books and memorizing things, and it was a whole different ballgame. Reb Nassan had this accolade that he was nachis la'umka dedina. Most people don't say that about me or you, that we understand the omek of the din so clearly. So how does Reb Nassan explain all of the math? The Gemara says on the third of the wide lines, la'olam kasavar hai kule hezeka avad, hai kule hezeka avad. Really, everybody, the balashor, the two plaintiffs, the balashor and the balabor, are 100%, each in their own right, 100% accountable. You want to tell me that each person should really be paying 50%? And if so, how then did the brisa say that the balabor is 3/4 and the balashor is 1/4? Mishum de Omar le balashor le balabor. If you want to say shutfutoi my ahanyali, if you really want to say we're shutvim, you and I are both equals. Well, this shutvis is not really to my benefit at all, because I didn't get any reduction in cost. Shutva should be helpful to me. So therefore, because my animal's a tam, I'm chatzi nezek, and because you and I are shutvin, my chatzi nezek turns into 1/4 of a nezek, and therefore the balashor will have to pay 1/4, and the balabor pays 3/4. This is how Reb Nassan explained it. And Ibai Sema, another possible way to explain this complex sheet of Reb Nassan, is laolam kasavar hai palga hezeka avad, v'hai palga hezeka avad. Really, both the Baal HaShor and the Baal HaBor are each chayev chatzi nezek. They're chayev palga. This was a case we saw earlier that we didn't like. Because if you say that this is true, that really it's not that everyone's fully responsible, but the two parties are each 50% responsible. The problem is that in a case like that, the way that the payouts work is that the Baal HaShor pays a quarter, the Baal HaBor pays half, and the Nizak loses out on a quarter. So how do we answer that question? The Gemara says 7 lines from the bottom. Mishum de Amar le Baal HaShor le Baal HaBor. I, the Baal HaShor, my animal pushed your animal. I can say to the Baal HaBor, Ana toroi bebircha ashkechise. Lamaisa, my animal is in your pit. And at ketalte, it must therefore be that you are the one who caused its murder. So my deisli liishtalume mehayach mishtalamna, you should pay me whatever you can pay me. My delesli liishtalume mehayach mishtalamna mimech, and whatever's left over I should collect from you. And here's the complex part: because the only thing that the Baal HaShor would ever be on the hook for is half of Chasi Nezek, which is Revia. Therefore, by definition, he's allowed to collect 3/4 from the second plaintiff, which is the Baal HaBor. And that's how Reb Nosson works out all the math. Continuing in a similar vein, Amar Rava, hiniach even al pi habor. Let's say that a man placed a stumbling block right at the top of a pit. Ubashor v'niskal ba v'nafal bebor. And this animal tripped over the stone, and then he fell in, and the shore fell in and died. Banu lemachlokas Reb Nosson v'Rabbanon. Says the Gemara that this is the machlokas Reb Nosson and the Rabbanon, where the Rabbanon would say that only one person is chayev. That's the person who put the stone out, just like he said earlier. Masha'in Kain, according to Reb Nosson would say that the person who is responsible is everybody, both the person who put the stone out and the Baal HaBor. So says the Gemara, that should be their machlokas. Asks the Gemara Pshita, of course, why would that not be the case? When there's multiple plaintiffs, the Rabbanan will say that only one is accountable, and Reb Nosson will say, collect from whoever you can collect from. So why did the Gemara bother? Why did Rava even bother making this case? So the Gemara says, Rava explains, because the owner of the pit can say to the owner of the animal, Ila bira didi, if not for my bor, Torah didach abakatile, your animal would have died one way or the other. In our case, we can't say that. In our case, where my animal pushes yours, Baal ha'even leBaal ha'bor, the case where the Evan, trips on the stone, I could say, La bira didach, Avna didi, my hava avda. If there was no pit that followed my stumbling block, right? So then your animal would not have died. You have a miskalba, have enough of a kind. It would have tripped, he would have gotten up and he would have moved on. Kamash malan. We therefore see that there's a deeper logic that's considered more acceptable. To Amar le, ilav even lo have enough labira. So there's really two people who did something wrong. The first guy put out a stumbling block. The second guy had a pit. And the Gemara wants to know which one was more culpable. So really, it's Banu Lemachlokas, Reb Nosson and the Rabbanan. But there was a Havamina to say that without your pit, the animal wouldn't die. And the other guy said back to him, without your stone, the animal wouldn't have tripped. So which of those two svaras are better? Neither of them are better in the scheme of things. But we had a Havamina that perhaps you can say the stumbling block was the first thing that happened. And therefore, that should be of greater responsibility. Kamash Malan, we don't say that. And really, it's just Banu Lemachlokas, Reb Nosson and the Rabbanan, that when there's multiple plaintiffs, the Rabbanan would say only one person is accountable. And according to the Tanakama would say only one person is accountable. Reb Nosson would say, collect money from whoever you can. Itmar, that brings us to the top of Nun Gimel Amud Beis, and we continue analyzing cases that are, again, very similar to what we've been learning thus far. Shor, you have a regular shor, and B'shor Psulei HaMukdashin Shenagchu. So you have two shvarim that are fighting with one another. One of them is a regular shor, and the other is psulei mukdashin, an animal that was initially mukdash to the Beis HaMikdash, but became pasul and can no longer be used in the Beis HaMikdash. Skip the parentheses. Abaye Amar Meshalem Chatzi Nezek. Abaye says in a case like this, there's a tashlumen of Chatzi Nezek, where my animal kills a short, is no geach, it gores a short psule mukdashin. Ravina Amar Mishalim Ravina Nezek, they only pay a quarter of a nezek. Says the Gemara, Have tam. Perhaps we can argue that both of these cases are actually talking about a tam. And really, Chatzi Nezek is a normal payment for tam. And this is Hakir Rabbanan, Hakir Rab Nasan. According to the Rabbanan, they say, get your Chatzi Nezek and move on. How does Ravina end up with Nezek Shalom? Because he holds like Rab Nasan. I can collect my Chatzi Nezek from multiple plaintiffs. And this is a great example of how holding like Rav Nasan can yield the Nizak more money. Because the Maisa, he lost a whole animal. I got Chati Nezek from plaintiff number 1, Chati Nezek from plaintiff number 2. Shalom al Yisrael. Ibai on the 5th line of Nun Gimel Amud Beis, and we're going to be stopping about 5 lines or so before the end of this page. Perhaps we can say that both of these shitas, that the animal will have to pay Chati Nezek, or that the animal will pay Revia Nezek, perhaps those are all like the sheets of the Rabbanon that say you can only collect from one plaintiff and not multiple plaintiffs. How so? Habitam v'habimuad. Oh, that's much cleaner. That makes a lot more sense, because according to the Rabbanon, if the animal that killed was a tam, then it only gets paid Chati Nezek like the regular rules. And if the animal was a muad, then it gets paid Nezek Shalim like the regular rules. So this is even cleaner. There are those who say that things were a little bit different in regards to the case of shor v'shor psule hamukdash and shenagchu. 6-7 lines down, Abaye Omar Chati Nezek. Abaye says that there's a Chati Nezek payment, Ravina Amar Kule Nezek, and perhaps Haba Muad. Maybe we can say that both of these cases are actually talking about a case where there's an animal that's a muad that caused the damage. And Hakir Rabbanon, v'Hakir Reb Nasan, it is an animal that's muad, but maybe not all the plaintiffs are available. And according to the Rabbanan, you can only collect from whoever is available. And Reb Nasan says you can collect from anyone. And Iba Yisema, Hakir Reb Nasan, Haba muad v'Haba tam, that we can come up like we saw earlier in the first version of this question, that perhaps we can come up with a scenario where everything is like Reb Nasan and Haba muad Haba tam, that when it comes to an animal that's a muad, he's able to collect from multiple plaintiffs, and in regards to a tam, he can't collect more than the Chati Nezek he's owed. And that would be a couple of different ways to understand this question and how to understand Abaye and Ravina in regards to shor v'shor psule hamuktashin. About a quarter of the way down, Rava has another statement, another memra. Amar Rava, shor v'adam shedach bo labor. You have a shor and a person that push something into a pit. Le'inyan nizakin kulan chayavin. When it comes to damages, everyone's chayav. Le'inyan arba dvarim udmei vlados. If a person is pushed in, then as it relates to the arba dvarim, the tsar, ripui, nezek, and boshes, all of those b'dmei vlados. If Rachmana litzlan, the animal is pushed in and the animal was pregnant and the fetus died, adam chayav. If that act was done by a human being, then the animal then he's obligated, he's chayav to pay for the damages. The shor ubor pater, and if the damages were caused by a shor or by a bor, then the din is that the shor and the balabor would be pater. Lenyan kofer, in regards to a person being pushed in and the person being killed, ushloshim shaleved, and if an eved is killed, shor chayev, adam ubor pturim. If a shor did that damage, so then the halacha is that you'd be chayev. However, adam ubor, if the damage was done by a person or by a pit, in regards to kofer, so then, or shloshim, so then adam ubor pturim. Le'inyan kalim. What about kalim that fall in? As we've seen this many times, our brains should already be primed that kalim don't get payments out of a bor. And as well with shor psule hamukdashin, because they really have no value. These animals no longer are regular animals. Adam v'shor chayavin. If these things are pushed in by an adam v'shor yerchayev ubor pater, because we already said about a bor pater umay taima amar krava hamesielo b'misha hameshelo yotzazeh she'in hameshelo. We're excluding the case of psule hamukdashin because the mace can't be transferred; it has no value. The mace is 0. So therefore, the case of hamesielo exempts us in regards to psule hamukdashin. Says the Gemara Lememra, is this to tell me the pshita le Rava? That Rava was so clear how to learn this pasuk, that's not true. This was a question that Rava posed. It wasn't such a simple memra, just a statement of I know what's going on here. Rava didn't know how to analyze. This was a question that he had asked about shor psule mukdashin that fell into a pit. Do we say, this was Rava's handling, this was Rava's chakira, do we say, Hai ve'amesi hielo, that when the pasuk says v'mesi hielo, that's b'misha, hameshelo yotzazeh she'ena meshelo, to teach us that by psulei hamukdashin, because the animal has no value, so therefore there is no mesi hielo, so therefore you're putter on damaging a shore. That's psulei hamukdashin. Oh, Dilma ve'amesi hielo teaches us the bailam etaplim benevela huda'asa, to teach us that the bailam get the animal of the nevela. It was not pashut at all to Rava in regards to how to treat psulei hamukdashin. So says the Gemara, okay, I mean, you're right, but Basar Debaya Hadar Pashta, you're right. He's the one who gave the question in the beginning of shiur, but he's also the one who gave the answer. So who cares? Who cares that he was struggling with it a little bit? It doesn't matter. Lamaisi is the one who gave the answer. Ella says the Gemara, if that's true, then Bailim, if it's true now that it's clear to Rava that one is putter if psulei mukdashin gets damaged, we're 2/3 of the way down from the bottom of Nun Gimel Amud Beis. We're 2/3 down from the top, actually. If Rava was so clear that the pasuk of Amesi Yelo is teaching me that psulei mukdashin is putter, then where does Rava learn the idea from that in general that Bailam Amr Taplin Benevela, that the person who gets to take responsibility for the corpse? So says the Gemara, Nafkale mean v'hamesi Yelo deshor. He learns this from another pasuk of Amesi Yelo. There's two psukim of Amesi Yelo. Pasuk number 1 reads like this. There are only two psukim apart. Pasuk number 1 reads, Bal habor yishalem kesef yashiv liv alav Amesi Yelo. The next pasuk reads, O no da kishor nagach v'chulei, and at the end it says Amesi Yelo. So there's two of them. So says the Gemara that Rava is nafgalei, mean v'hamesi Yelo deshor. In that next pasuk, which is pasuk Lamed Vav, that's where he learns that Bailam are metaplim benevela. So he has two different psukim, one to teach him that shor psulei mukdashin are going to be putter if they get damaged, and the second is to teach us that Bailam are metaplim benevela, that owners have to deal with the corpse. Says the Gemara, how do you know that that second pasuk of Amesi Yelo, which was by shor, was Mafkis Leila Bailam Metaplim Benevela, that pasuk was to teach us about Bailam Metaplim Benevela, and V'amesi Yelo Debor, and the first pasuk, which is pasuk Lamed Daled, that case, how do we know about that? That it's Mafkis Leila Misha Amei Shelo, to exclude the case of Psulei Mukdashin. Perhaps, says the Gemara, Epuch Ana. Perhaps I should reverse the limudim, and if I reverse the limudim, that means that the V'hamesi Yelo, where we try to learn out Psulei Mukdashin, we no longer can learn that out. And if that's true, Rashi highlights that's what's going on over here. If that's true, then I don't know that Psulei Mukdashin are pater when they get damaged. Says the Gemara, Mistabra, because it's logical to say that pater gabe bor, hoelu pater gabe kelim. It makes sense to teach that Psulei Mukdashin that fall into a pit are pater, just like kelim that fall into a pit are pater. Says the Gemara, Adarabba, I could have argued the exact opposite. Pater gabe shor, I should have argued that there's a patur by a shor, shekain pater bo chatzi nezek, because there, when it comes to a shor, we have a case of tam, where you're always going to be chayiv, only chatzi, which means we're always dissolving half of your burden. And therefore, maybe we should have said pater in that case. Says the Gemara, it's true that by a shor, you have a partial dissolution of obligation. By a short time, you only have to pay chati nezek, and you never have to pay more. But kule nezek miaslo ashkechan. But the only time we have a full exemption of something is in regards to a bor, and that is when the bor has kalim in it. And just like when the bor has kalim in it, you're pater. Therefore, it makes more sense to learn the pasuk of Amesi Yelo to teach me that Psulei Mukdashin is also fully pater in regards to a bor. We'll stop right here at the 2 dots, 5, 6 lines from the bottom, and pick up tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.